All right. Well, it is so good to see everyone again. I'm going to get started, and I anticipate we'll get more folks in as the minutes tick on here. But I am Danielle Varda. I'm our CEO at Visible Network Labs, and I'm joined today by some of the members of my team. You'll meet Dr. Jenny Lawlor here, who's going to co-present with me. And we are launching today the third of four different webinars, presentations in our webinar series on turning ecosystem data into impact. Today, we are going to talk about from having data to getting to insights. So this is a really fun webinar because today we get to really focus on the reward for all the work of putting all of the data and getting people to answer surveys. Now we get to find insights and see really interesting things. So I mentioned I'm Danielle Varda, and you'll meet Jenny Lawlor in a moment. We also have a team of developers and product folks, communications and other data people who help us basically take the science of networks and turn it into technology and different kinds of methods and things like that. What I would love is for each of you to introduce yourself in the chat. We always want to know who you are, maybe what you're working on, why you're interested in this topic. So why are you a network kind of geek like we are? So feel free to put that in there. We've had folks connect with each other in the chat, and that's always been fun stories to tell. Our organization is called Visible Network Labs, and our purpose, our tagline is to make invisible networks visible. We have seen the power of being able to see these configurations of relationships all around us. We are all embedded in social structures and systems of networks, and also we have personal networks. And we know that although we are all embedded in them, they're very hard to see. And so when it's hard to see, it's hard to act on them, it's hard to help each other and build on them. So that's what we're really working on to do at Visible Network Labs, is really try to make these invisible networks visible in ways that we can leverage them for good or for impact. We do this work because of what we refer to as the network way of working. So we really know that there are people who are working doing their everyday job, but more and more folks are being asked to do what we call the network way of working, which is really just not just doing the thing that you are trained for so well, but also having to reach across boundaries because the power and the understanding that networks have an advantage is so normative now. We know that there are lots of people who need data and tools and some kind of strategy and journey forward to do that work. So our hope is to address that. So today we're gonna we got through our intros. We are really going to talk about mapping and analyze the network, your network data in the Partner CPRM. The Partner CPRM is the software that we have developed to do this work. It's a really start to finish platform that allows you to bring in all of your member data, all of your attributes, collect data using a survey system, analyze it, and create dashboards. So a full start to finish process, which is a lot of times substitutes a whole evaluation, for example. And so it's a really comprehensive tool, and we'll hope that you see parts of this. We're gonna do some real life examples from our own projects to show you. And then we always end the webinar after 45 minutes, but then we stay on for 15 minutes for any extra questions that folks have, and you can come off camera, very informal time period. So I will just kind of recap a little bit of our first two webinars. The first webinar was on getting your member data in, and the next one was on collecting the data. But we talk about all of this work as networks. And the reason we do that, you might call this collaboration or collective impact or working across sectors. We call these networks because we measure them as nodes and lines. So network science is the science of how things are connected. And what we're doing here is looking at basically three types of data. So as you build out this data set for yourself, a partnership data set for your community, your ecosystem, you're going to want to think of these three types of data. The first one are what we refer to as the nodes. So like those little dots there, those are the members in our networks, in our ecosystems. They can be organizations or people. You can be very creative and make them also thoughts and beliefs and ideas and things like that. And then the lines between them are the second type of data, which are the relationships. And that's the special part of this kind of work, where you can really capture the relationship between any two of these members and the quality and the content of that relationship. And then the third type of data are the attributes. And so the attributes, for example, here are the colors of the nodes. And we have one highlighted as primary sectors. So if you're looking at interorganizational networks, you'll see that this is a really helpful tool for looking at each individual member and kind of making sense of their relationships and patterns and groupings and things like that. But you can put any kind of attribute in there. So you'll have to think of those three types of data as you work through a system like this. I mentioned ours is called the Partner CPRM. A CPRM is a community partner relationship management tool. You see some screenshots of it here, but we're going to go right into it today. If you haven't already signed up for it, we think you should. Alex on our team will put the registration link in the chat, and then go ahead and sign up. When you sign up, you'll have some access to some free parts of it. So it'll be something you can play with right away. The features of a partner CPRM are really, they kind of mimic a CRM, like a customer relationship management system, except that's built on the foundation of converting people to paying customers through marketing funnels. But most of the folks that come to us and that we work with, our users are not doing that as their primary function for using this. They are doing stakeholder engagement and community building and that kind of stuff. So, but we have found that, the core of kind of getting all your member data in there is the starting point. Then collecting data or importing data about those members is something next. And then really being able to see that data in a way that allows you to strengthen the work that you're doing. So the CPRM is built very much on community engagement. All of the features have been built because we have had feedback from people in communities who said, if you could do this, it would really help us do that. And so that's one main thing. Community capacity building is another value that the CPRM is built on, which means we find it really important that community members have the ability to use the data after it's collected. And the third value that we've really built this on is on the democratization of data. We really believe in that at Visible Network Lab. So we believe if you take data from community, you should find some ways to potentially give it back. So we have built a lot of features into the CPRM that allow you to do that. And that is a really special kind of feature. We believe we are a technology company that has built a platform, but we've really incorporated a mission-driven approach and also really strong set of science and measures in there. So I'll just mention again, we are on our third of 4 types of webinars in our series of Chaos to Clarity. And this one is our From Data to Insights. We have one more coming up on November 19th, which will take what we're doing today and then show you how to share it, how to build dashboards, how to build member profiles, how to build reports, and then like how to think about who your audience is and how you want to communicate data and take it from being something really confusing to something really clear for people. Okay, a couple more recalls. We spent the first webinar on developing and managing your partnership database. I'm not going to go through all of this again. There's lots of webinars, not lots, but a few that you can track now and go back and listen to. But really what we're trying to do is go from multiple spreadsheets and places where your member data are in your head anywhere and put them into a database. This is a free part of our tool. You can go in and put your member data in there and all the attribute data that you want, at least get it all in one place, and you'll get some access to some pretty easy to use analysis tools. So again, I'm not going to go through all of this, but we do refer to this work as member management. So this is where you can kind of manage your members and all their data. The second webinar was on capturing data from your ecosystem members. So in that one, we talked about how you get over some of these challenges of collecting and capturing data from your ecosystem members. There is a whole survey tool built into the platform, like a Qualtrics or SurveyMonkey, but with an additional feature of being able to collect the relational data. All of the data that's collected in the survey tool go directly into the analysis tool. So you don't have to do exporting, importing, or anything like that. It just knows you have it there. And we have lots of support in there in terms of a whole library of support, but also things like templates and questions that you don't have to come up with all on your own. So again, 2 full webinars on those, but what we're going to talk about now is how once you have that data, how to translate it into actionable insights. So we really as a team think a lot about like what are people struggling with, what are their pain points, and then how can we help to address them. And we hear this from you all a lot. We do a lot of Mentimeters and data collection and things like that, but things we wanted, like we really empathize around what makes it difficult to analyze and then translate the data. A lot of times people will see a lot of network data and they just don't know where to start. So it feels overwhelming. It can be hard to find meaning in that. We see that there could be this tendency for the person analyzing the data to kind of interpret it in a silo. What our team has found is that we use our expertise to kind of do a first draft, a first preliminary findings of data. We always take it back to the members of the ecosystem and we ask them to review it. We look for where their eyes light up. We look for where their questions are. And that's how we continue down the path of data interpretation. Another thing that we see is a lot of people love the maps. And I always say the map is the front cover of the story of your network. And then you open the book and there are all of the chapters of data. It is multi-layered, so many types and ways you can look at these data. And the map could be enough to get really a great conversation and some understanding happening, but finding meaning in the multiple ways you can see the data can be challenging. And the primary thing that our team finds is that there is often a lack of clarity about what we're trying to answer because we didn't articulate it to begin with. So our team spends a lot of time, in-depth work in the design process of these projects. So we really try to really articulate what we're trying to do and then figure out what survey questions we need to ask, what data points we need to collect in order to do that interpretation. So the ways that we have found analysis and translating very rewarding and valuable is by one, doing great design of the survey and question set. So every time you get to the interpretation part and you think, I wish I knew this about my network, you do, because you spent a lot of time figuring out what to ask in the beginning. We find collaborating with partners to get that design right incredibly important. So some of our partners who we work with just want us to do it all, but we prefer to work very closely with them on thinking about the culture that they are in, the way they use their language, and what we're trying to measure. We really do a lot of iterative data analysis and interpretation. So we never come out with a final report in the beginning. We come out with many different versions of the data. And again, look for the eyes lighting up and things like that. It's through that process that the best insights come. We find that narrowing on a few findings can help be really directive, like it's so many options. So just finding a couple to start with would be good. And then connecting each data point to an action step. I always say every data point should have an action step. That's what really makes the value visible for folks. All right, so I am going to do a short demo of our platform that shows you where all of this analysis tends to happen. And then I'm going to switch it over, hand it over to Jenny, and she's going to give examples so that we can really turn this into something that feels very tangible. So I'm going to go through an overview of what I'm about to show you. You all will get these slides after, so hopefully this will be one way you can come back and rethink about it. I am going to show you some network mapping, the thing that most of us are pretty interested in. I'm going to show you a couple of our automated insights like key player analysis. Also, we have a full insights library inside the platform to help you just look things up and understand what you're seeing. We do have a connection to ArcGIS, and so you can do all of your geospatial analysis right inside the platform as long as you have the geospatial data, so addresses and that kind of underlying data. We also have just scores about each of the members in there that allow you to add real data points to the work. Charts and tables, which I always say are the things you're probably most familiar with. The network summary, and which allows you to basically just see an overview of all of your data points. And then there is a way just to do a little bit more in-depth look at your member data. So I'm going to just start right here and go into the platform to show you a few things. And if you have just come onto the call, if you haven't introduced yourself in the chat, we hope that you will, because we just want to make sure everyone gets to say hello. So we have been in our other webinars through the whole member section, which is where we loaded in this case, just over 300 members. So I'm not going to go through that again. Capture is where we showed you how to launch surveys, how to construct questions, and where to find all of those features and tools. In the last webinar, we talked about like what you would ask and why. So what I'm going to show you today is the Explore section. And in the Explore section, this is where you can look at, for example, your whole ecosystem, your networks of networks, or do a little extra exploring around your members. As a reminder, I am showing you a example data set called the Jeffco CPRM. This is a data set that we created with the support from the Colorado Gives Foundation to look at the ecosystem of organizations serving people in Jefferson County, Colorado. Because the foundation funded it in with the goal to be public facing. The database is actually public facing. So this is a real database from a real community. You'll see all of the information in here that they collected, and that's what I'll be using here to kind of go through this with you today. One thing I didn't note, but I would like to, is that when you do log in and you register, you'll see this top will say ecosystem owner, and that will be you to create your own ecosystem. You'll also see a Snow White and a Community Health Coalition data set in here. So all the things I'm doing, you can do with those data sets. So you can play around with it as well. And then you can use your own ecosystem to start loading in all your own members and things like that. So what I'm looking at here is the whole ecosystem. And the reason it looks like this is because it's made up of networks of networks. This is actually one whole network inside this ecosystem, and this is another. They don't share the same attributes, which is why this one on the left has no color in the nose, and the one on the right does. You can see I can come over here and say, you know, I'd really like to see my network in a different way. Whoops. I was trying to pick one that, let's see, I expected it to start somewhere else, but you can come over here and look at this to find different ways to see your network. I'm not doing what I thought I was going to do here, but this allows you to look at different layouts. But what I'm going to do is, and what you'll notice is on the ecosystem layout, what you can do is you can look at the different nodes, which is the little icon here, and differentiate the attributes that you'd like to see. We don't do a lot of relational analysis at the ecosystem level because of the differences in each network of network. And so when you capture, you'll create these different networks, and then they will appear over here. So what you're seeing here is the Jeffco CPRM network only, not the others as well. So from here, I might want to make my lines just a little bit thicker. I can also make them a little bit lighter. And what that allows me to do is see my network in a few different ways. So just as I'm starting out my exploring, I might want to play around a little bit with some of these features. I can also make my node size a little bit bigger, recolor things. I do have the node labels turned on right now where you can see them. I can also turn the node labels off And if I bring in my isolates, it brings in it. We only have one in this network. You just see it here. But as a reminder, each of these nodes has a number, which is its node label. And if I click on it, I can see who they are. And if I click on the eyeball, I will go to their member profile. So I'll show you that in just a moment. So this is just a little exploring at the highest level. I'm going to turn my label size down a little bit because they're kind of crowding. And what you'll see here is from the node section, I can come in and do all kinds of coloring by different colors or attributes, question types. I can also come here and look at different relationships. Right now I have it at the highest level, they just exist or not, but I might want to come down and look at what kinds of activities they engage in together. I can clear that map and I see no relationships. And then I can say what I'd really like to see is just client referrals, for example. So I can just pick one type of relationship and then kind of see my network in that way. Since I have my isolates turned on, we're seeing them. So different ways you can filter through your map and start to explore it and find insights. I might be interested from this network map, which has client referrals showing, to only look, for example, at a couple of sectors. So I might say, I want to see how that looks in my food security systems. And then if I bring in public health, for example, now I have a client sharing network here that is allowing me to see those two together. I'm going to go ahead and turn them all back on. So I see all the types of relationships that they have. I have a feeling I might be, let me change the setting. There we go. So I can now see this is my food systems and public health folks, because you'll see the key told me who's who. I might be interested, who is this interesting 67, Go Farm, that's really bridging these two groups together. So lots of filters to just start to look at who's who, who's connected. I could say, let me bring in my early childhood, early education folks. And see how they're connected to the network and in which ways. I keep hitting this rerun map to look at things a little bit differently. Actually, I feel like the label size is still too big for my liking, so I'm gonna make them a little smaller. And what I just wanted to point out here is just a couple of things. You can come over here to the Insights tab, and I can click on Key Players, and this allows me to quickly find kind of who my main folks are in different categories of description based on how they're connected to each other. So I can see here Triad Bright Futures is playing a really high centrality position because they are showing up so high. If I turn them off and just look at these two, you'll see a huge difference because now I've taken out Triad Bright Futures. So you can begin to kind of see some of these positions in these different ways. You can also come here to our Insights library, and I could say, I'm really interested in different things about centralization, and we just have a whole bunch of information in here on questions you can ask, ways you can understand some of the different things that you're seeing. So I'm not going to do a full demo. The last thing I'll say about these is that you can download images or save these settings. That's going to come in the last webinar, where we're going to show you how those go into the visualization library, allowing you to build out dashboards and things like that. So just before I switch over to Jenny, I'm going to show you a few more features. I'm going to go ahead and bring a few more folks back in here. Maybe I'll also bring in my human services folks. I'm actually going to turn them off because they look a lot like the others. So let's bring in our workforce. Okay, so I just wanted to bring in more so that when I go over here, and what's really interesting about Jefferson County are these silos. We really, like, here's workforce and employment agencies over here, really not well connected to what is early childhood and public health, kind of looking like they're doing a lot of work together. Our food systems also are pretty siloed here. So immediately you can make an action step, maybe to figure out how to do some better integration between food systems and these other sectors and things like that. But if I go to GIS map, what I'll see are the nodes are going to now plot on the map based on their location that was entered in their member profiles. So here I have, I can see information about their geospatial locations. I can turn my labels back on and see information about each node again, just like before. But over here, you'll see a new menu item, which allows me to go through the geospatial data. So we have a whole bunch loaded in there, even like school districts, Senate districts, things like that. And then as well as some census data, county health ranking data, and stuff like that. So then just real briefly, this is where you'll see a bunch of network scores. Like for example, you can see the number of ties folks have. In this data set, we did not use our value and trust measures. Those would show up here. Charts and tables are where you'll be able to really just do some really neat work with, you can look at an attribute, you can come and pick a question, maybe that someone answered, and do some heat mapping, a little asset mapping. So it's a crosstab. It's also where you can just look at individual attributes or questions and see some data about that. So let you do all that. And finally, the summary tab is where it'll just be a big summary of all of the data that you have in here for this particular network. So the nice thing is if I want to switch to a different network, I just come up here and pick the other network, and then I can jump right into that analyzer as well. So stay tuned for next webinar where we'll go into the share section, but I'm going to turn it over to Jenny now to talk about how you use these data points and translate them into practice, into insights. And she's going to be using a couple of real projects that are public facing for us that she can share.
Thanks, Danielle. Can everybody see my screen?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Well, it's good to see you all today. Exciting that we have lots of familiar faces and names in our attendee list today. So I'm glad you all could make time to join us. And as Danielle mentioned, I pulled a few examples for us to talk about today that just shows some of the range of ways that people use the data they collect with our system to inform the work they're doing across a few different types of projects, some of them multiple time points, some just one point in time. And I wanted to start with one that's just a really simple analysis. This is for one of our projects working with a rural suicide prevention network for veterans. And this was just a really simple data point that really helped them to see how their network had grown over time and changed in line with the goals that they had set for themselves. So this group, at the outset, they're a rural community serving veterans, and they realized at the beginning from their data that a heavy kind of portion of their network was comprised of military and veterans organizations. And we also see a lot of faith-based organizations. And, they really had set a goal so that, as they built this network, they could invite others in their community, right? Get a greater breadth and engagement so that it's not just the same small set of organizations doing this work. And we see here, at time one, first of all, that they only heard from 10 organizations. So it was a pretty small network at the outset and fairly focused on just a few types of organizations. At their second time point, they had 34 organizations who participated, and they saw just a ton more breadth in terms of who was involved in this network. So they were able to just use that as kind of one first indicator that helped them to see how this network had changed over time and to evaluate how it was changing in line with the goals they had set for engagement with their larger community. So this is just a really kind of simple data point, right? And this data actually came from the attributes that this group put into the database. So it wasn't something that they actually collected in the survey. It was data they already had about the organization. So I know in our previous webinars, we talked a lot about attribute data and the value of doing that, even though it can take a lot of work to get that set up. There's definitely a payoff, and this is one example of how that can pay off in the work that we do. So for our next example, I want to draw on a project that we did in partnership with the Rocky Mountain Prevention Research Center. This was also some work that was funded by the Center for Disease Control and Prevention. And specifically, it focused on a network in Colorado that was working on reducing and preventing adverse childhood experiences in young children. And what we know about adverse childhood experiences is that, when children have really difficult experiences or traumatic experiences, it can have significant impacts on their health later in life. So this was a network that really focused on trying to figure out what could be done and how we could bring together organizations across the community to address that. And we actually published this work in a paper that I think Alex is going to share in the chat. So if you are interested in knowing more, you can learn more there. But again, this was another network that was exploring how the network was developing over time. And for this one, we're focusing on those relational style questions. So I know in our last webinar, we talked a little bit about, how we capture relationships, and we set up questions in our surveys that help us to understand them. So this group actually filtered down their network, and they just looked at relationships that involved resource sharing. So that's what this looks like at their first time point. You can kind of get a sense for what this network looks like. We got a few folks who are isolated. They don't have anybody who they share resources with. And then there are some that are really well connected in here. Even from the outset. And this group had, they had set some goals. They wanted to develop the network so that more folks would be engaged, right? That folks would have more partners who they could share resources with. And they were also really focused on building the leadership of the network, because it had previously kind of been everybody just doing this work separately. And they were trying to really bring people together and catalyze this network into something a little more formal. So now we can look at our time two network, right? And just visually inspecting what this looks like, you can see immediately we've got a lot more relationships in here. We've only got this one member of our network who's isolated. And also some of those more kind of densely connected members, we see there are a few of them in here that are pretty well connected. And what we found when we actually really looked at the data beyond just looking at the network map was that, in fact, they had, those leaders who they had been really investing in had become quite a bit more connected, and they were connected to a kind of a wider range of folks in the network. And so we actually worked with them to put numbers behind this work. Immediately, you can see the number of partners or partnerships had increased quite a bit, right? We started with about 220, and we increased that. We almost doubled that number from the development work that they were doing. And we saw, an increase in what we call centralization, and that's here kind of that concentration of partners for leaders. And then on average, folks had almost twice as many partners who they shared resources with as part of this work. So quite a bit of a real increase in places you can turn in terms of sharing resources in this network. But we also measured what's called average path length, and that shows if you've ever heard of like the 6 degrees of separation, right? This average path length tells us on average how many degrees are separating any two members of the network. And so we saw, promising kind of development there, or a trend, which was that we did see a decrease in that path length, which makes a lot of sense. When you have more connections, it should be easier to navigate to reach other people in the network, even if you aren't directly connected to them. And then finally, we saw an increase in what we call the clustering coefficient. And that is just a measure that tells us for any nodes partners, if your partners are connected to each other, then you have higher clustering. So you can imagine, right, what is it like when you have a friend group and you're connected to each of these friends, but they're not friends with each other, right? That can still be kind of an isolating experience. And when we're dealing with interorganizational networks, when folks have that kind of closure, their partners are connected to each other, it's easier to build trust and shared social norms and things like that. And so seeing that increased also was a really promising metric. And all of these metrics are things that, we were able to pull just from that one, network kind of mapping question. So we had that network member selection question, which set us up with all those relationships. And then we narrowed that down just to the relationships that were reported that deal with resource sharing. And that's how we got this. So it wasn't, only a couple of my small questions in the survey that help us to really tell the story of what happened with this network. So one more example, this is from our work with the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They asked us to look at their school improvement networks, and there were a number of networks involved in this, and we wanted to see, how those were developing over time. And we actually captured 3 time points of data from them. And what's interesting about this one is I actually pulled data. This is the same question that we used in the last point that I showed you, where we asked everybody about the activities they do together. So in the last one, we narrowed down and we looked just at those that do resource sharing activities. For this project, we wanted to really see the full breadth of what are all the different activities or things that folks are doing together. In this case, we asked, what do you work on together or discuss together? Um, and so we were able to kind of get a view here of like, how did this change over time? And you can see, just even at the first time point, a lot of these activities were just much less common. Importantly, part of that school improvement network model is really a strong focus on continuous improvement. So we see, that there was a big jump here, almost 25% from the starting point to our third time point, in terms of folks that are doing that continuous improvement work with their partners. You can see this question changed a little bit over time. So things like problem-specific content knowledge got added later. We just have one time point of data for that. But yeah, we see lots of interesting change here, and some things, right, like measurement and evaluation, we see that jumped and then it kind of leveled out or stabilized. And so in any project where we're looking at this type of data, as Danielle mentioned, like knowing from the beginning, what are the goals that you're trying to achieve? Like, how will you know when you look at your data if it's indicating that things are going well or that you might need to make adjustments? That those kind of tidbits can be really important, right? So in this case, I think we knew like seeing a jump in continuous improvement really gave us a positive outcome. But you might look at some of these other ones and say, oh, did we intend for this to increase or decrease or stay the same? And then that can help us again with thinking about process changes if we need to implement, programming or supports to help folks engage in different ways. We have that data available to help us do that, and then to check again at the next time point to see how we made change. And then one more kind of project that I want to pull up is our Jefferson County CPRM. So that's what Danielle was showing when she demoed the platform. And I want to start with one kind of interesting finding that we had in this project, which is about advocacy as a resource among the members of the network. This was something that when we were doing analysis on this, it raised a lot of questions for our team. And we wanted to kind of walk you through some of the things that we kind of learned and what our process was for discovery with that. And I think this also reflects what you may encounter as well, that this work is iterative and it takes some time to put all the pieces together and really be able to tell the story of the work that you're doing. So really where this starts is, there was this interesting finding from what we call this our Goldilocks question, or a Goldilocks style question. And the reason we say that is that we asked people if there was too little, the right amount, or too much of a set of resources in this community. So respondents to the survey, rated each of these for the Jefferson County community. How are those resources available or not? Unsurprisingly, it's pretty rare that we see very many folks saying there's too much of any resource. We're always hoping for more resources in our communities, of course. But the thing that really stood out to us and made us kind of scratch our heads was that we saw almost 50% of respondents said that there weren't enough resources around advocacy and policy change. And so we thought, oh, this is really interesting. There's not enough of that advocacy and policy change. But at the same time, we also asked everyone to tell us, what resources do you bring to this work? What can you contribute to this network? And also about 50% of respondents said that advocacy and policy change were resources or tools that they could bring to shared work. And that is pretty high, right? We don't always see that level of research contribution in a network. And so that made us wonder, what might be going on here? Why is it that this is something that folks are perceiving as scarce when lots of people say that this is something that they can support in their work? And we can add, one more layer to that, which is that we also looked at this question about, what do you do with your partners? What types of activities do they engage in? And we saw when we asked that we had 305 relationships where folks reported that they engage in advocacy activities with their partners. So pretty significant looking at this network. Here at the top, we have the full network. Those that are in Jefferson County are this kind of salmon color, and those that are just Colorado organizations are in this sort of lime green color. So just to kind of give a sense for who's specific to the county and who's maybe coming from other areas and connected to this network. And then down here, you can see just those Jefferson County organizations, but we still see here 177 relationships working on advocacy in Jefferson County. So kind of an incredible activity, like lots of this is going on. And we were thinking, okay, why is it that there's so much of this happening, but we're not, it still feels like it's scarce? And that brought us to one final question we asked in our survey, which was, we asked folks to tell us what they think of as their organization's most important contribution to this work. So where are they placing their effort and their kind of primary energy? And there was only one organization in the whole network that said advocacy was their most important contribution. We said that was Colorado Succeeds, which is sort of a education advocacy organization. So we see here, right, that there may be a mismatch, not just that everybody might be doing this, but it's not really their main focus, right? And figuring out, how do we help people to maybe focus more on that or make that a more primary focus as opposed to something that you just kind of do on the side is one way to help us build this work up a little bit. So those are just a few examples of, how we see this work, the analysis tools and the data that we collect in the platform popping up and ways that folks are using it. There are tons of different ways that you can engage with this data. So I definitely encourage you all, to get in the sandbox and play. If you don't have a free account yet, you can always sign up and you can start kind of getting a sense for some of the tools that are available in the platform. And then I'm gonna just pull us ahead a little bit to wrap us up for today. So I want to encourage everybody, this was just a taste of the analysis tools that we have. Our next webinar is coming up on November 19th, and we're going to talk about how to share your ecosystem data and build collective capacity in your community with that data. So you might make some really nice graphs or be excited about them. How do we actually turn those into dashboards or profiles that we can share out and then use for action in our communities? That'll be something that we'll talk about in our next webinar. And you can register at visiblenetworkslabs.com/webinars. Before we kind of move on, please feel free to post in the chat. Let us know if there are any other topics or skills that you'd like to see covered in future webinars. I know we just have one more session in this series. But after that, we're always excited to hear what you all want to learn about and how we can share about what we've learned from our work with network science. If you want to stay engaged, you can also lots of different ways to connect with us. You can set up your free account. Of course, join us for our next webinar, but also you can book a consultation or demo if you want to learn more about your specific network needs, and you can meet with a member of our teams. And I believe Alex will be sending out the slides from this webinar, so you'll be able to kind of see all of this yourself, but also there will be links in that follow-up email if you want to do something like register for a webinar. And then, yeah, finally, I want to just open up the floor for questions. I know that we're at about our time point for this, the webinar itself, but our team will plan to stay on until the top of the hour, and we are excited to answer any questions you all might have or ideas or reactions to what we've talked about today. So I will pause there.
Great, thanks, Jenny. Thanks, Jenny. And so if anyone has a question that you want to put in the chat right now, we can answer that. And feel free to come off your video or just speak out also. You don't have to put it in the chat. And whatever question that you might have is probably one that others have, so don't feel shy about asking it. So we don't see any questions yet. While waiting, we think of a lot of like frequently asked questions all of the time, and I think that probably the biggest question that folks have when they are doing this kind of work is really just how to deal with so much of the data that you have. So I always suggest when you start to analyze your networks, especially when you're in the platform, to just kind of start with a blank slate and build it up rather than trying to start with all the things and then kind of go back down. So that's probably one of the first questions we always get is just like where to start. So we try to actually encourage people to wipe the slate clean and then build it back up, which is usually an easier way to see that data. Um, okay, if we don't see any questions or have any, um, then we might end a little bit early. Okay, this might be our first webinar in the entire history of doing these where we haven't had a question. You all are quite quiet today. All right. Well, in that case, we will just assume that there was enough information to keep your minds swimming right now and a lot there. We have a whole resources page on our website that you can access. Thanks, Eric. That you can access and find tons of resources for how to do this stuff. It's labeled under resources for Visible Network Labs, and we have infographics and blogs and all kinds of different things that can kind of help you get through some of this work. So use that as use that as you try to sort through things as well. So good to see you all, and reach out if you have questions. And we will see you all soon on another time. Hopefully next in our last of our 4-part webinar series. So thank you all.